They abandoned their belief in the supernatural. Now you are asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No!
Hello everyone and welcome to Trolling with Logic for this week. Sadly, we don't have a news segment for you. We were unable to get everyone together. There was just too much going on with people's personal lives. But we do have some segments, and we do have an interview we recorded a few months ago with Rob Poole about spirituality and healthcare. We have Lundy continuing his guide to philosophy, and Kitchs has a segment for us. Sadly, Ziller's not available this week. He has some personal stuff to take care of, so the guide to geometry will be back at some point in the future. In the meantime, sit back, enjoy, and next up is Lundy with his philosophy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one more Philosophy 101. I'm Big Lundy and I'm your guide for today. Last time we discussed the basis of epistemic reasoning. We went over foundationalism, coherentism, and foundherentism, and we learned the short answer to the question of does every justification itself require justification is no. Today we'll get into a bit more detail on one of these three approaches to epistemic reasoning processes. For a foundationalist account of justification to be plausible, it has to solve two problems. First, by virtue of what exactly is a basic belief justified? Second, how do basic beliefs justify non-basic beliefs? Before we address these questions, let us first consider the question as to what makes a justified belief basic in the first place. Once we've done that, we can then move on to discuss by virtue of what basic belief might be justified and how such a belief might justify a non-basic belief. According to one approach, what makes a justified belief basic is that it doesn't receive its justification from any other beliefs. Let's go over doxastic basicality, or DB for short. A person's justified belief that P is basic if and only if that person's belief that P is justified without owing its justification to any of that person's other beliefs. Let's consider what would, according to DB, qualify as an example of a basic belief. Suppose you notice someone's hat, and you also notice that hat looks blue to you. So you believe it appears that the hat is blue, and unless something very strange is going on, this belief is an example of a justified belief. DB tells us that this belief is basic if and only if it does not owe its justification to any other beliefs of yours. So if this belief is indeed basic, there might be some item to other or which that this belief owes its justification, but that item would not be another belief of yours. We call this kind of basicality doxastic because it makes basicality a function of how your doxastic system, your belief system, is structured. Now let us turn to the question as to where the justification that attaches to a belief might come from. If we think of basicality as defined by doxastic basicality, note that doxastic basicality merely tells us how a belief is not justified. It says nothing as to how a belief is justified. DB, therefore, does not answer that question. What we need, in addition to DB, is an account of what it is that justifies a belief, such as the hat is blue. According to one strand of foundationalist thought, the belief is justified because it can't be false, doubted, or corrected by others. So a belief is justified because the belief carries with it an epistemic privilege, such as infallibility, indubitability, or incorrigibility. The idea is that this belief is justified by virtue of its intrinsic nature, which makes it possess some kind of epistemic privilege over all your others. Note that the belief is not a belief about the hat. Rather, it's a belief about how the hat appears to you. So the belief is an introspective belief about a perceptual experience of yours. According to the thought we're considering here, a subject's basic beliefs are made up of introspective beliefs about the subject's own mental states, of which perpetual experiences make up one subset. Other mental states, which are subject to have basic beliefs, include such things as having a headache, being tired, feeling pleasure, or having a desire for a cup of coffee. Beliefs about external objects do not and indeed cannot qualify as basic. It's impossible for such beliefs to be on their own a kind of epistemic privilege needed for the status of being basic. According to a different version of foundationalism, a belief is justified not by virtue of possessing some kind of privileged status, but some further mental state of yours. That mental state, however, is not a further belief of yours. Rather, it's a perceptual experience that the belief is about. The hat's looking blue to you. Let's use the variable E to represent that experience. According to this alternative proposal, the belief and E are distinct mental states. The idea is that what justifies B and E, since E is an experience, not a belief of yours, and B is, according to DB. It's basic. Let's call the two versions of foundationalism that we just went over distinguished privilege foundationalism and experiential foundationalism. Privileged foundationalism restricts basic beliefs to beliefs about one's own mental states. Experiential foundationalism is less restrictive. According to it, beliefs about external objects can all be basic as well. Suppose instead of B, you believe that the hat is blue, but unlike the original belief, this one is about the hat itself and not the way the hat appears to you, such as a belief that not one about which we are infallible or otherwise epistemically privileged. Privileged foundationalism would therefore classify this belief as non-basic. It is, however, quite plausible to think that this experience justifies not only the belief, but also this new belief. As it's about the hat itself and not just how it appears to you. If this experience is indeed what justifies this new belief, and this new belief does not receive any additional justification from any further beliefs of yours, then this new belief qualifies, according to DB, as basic. Experiential foundationalism then combines two crucial ideas. One, when a justified belief is basic, its justification is not owed by any other belief. And two, what in fact justifies basic beliefs are themselves experiences. Under ordinary circumstances, perceptual beliefs such as this belief about the hat itself are not based on any further beliefs about one's own personal experiences. It's unclear, therefore, how privileged foundationalism can account for the justification of ordinary perpetual beliefs like the hat is blue and this is a statement about the hat itself rather than your experience of the hat. Experiential foundationalism, on the other hand, has no trouble at all explaining how ordinary perceptual beliefs are justified. They're justified by the perceptual experiences that give rise to them. This can be viewed as a reason for preferring experiential foundationalism to privileged foundationalism. Above, we noted that to think of basicality as not uncontroversial. DB defines just one kind of basicality. So let's go to epistemic basicality instead and see what that is. So epistemic basicality is that the subject's justified belief that the P is basic if and only if the subject's justification for believing that P does not depend on any justification the subject possesses for believing a further proposition. Epistemic basicality makes it more difficult for a belief to be basic than doxastic basicality does. To see why, we turn to the chief question, let's call it the J question, that advocates of experiential foundationalism. The J question being, why are perceptual experiences a source of justification? One way of answering this question can be viewed as a compromise position, since it's meant to be a compromise between foundationalism and its competitor, coherentism. The compromise position will be of interest to us because it illustrates how doxastic basicality and epistemic basicality differ. If we adopt the compromise of beliefs, the compromise position, beliefs such as the belief about the hat itself, as opposed to the experience, will qualify as basic according to doxastic basicality, but according to epistemic basicality, it's non-basic. So let's see what the compromise is. Let's say we're a coherentist for a moment. We might answer this question, the J question, as follows. Perceptual experiences are a source of justification because we are justified in believing them to be reliable. As we will soon see, making perceptual justifications dependent on the existence of reliability attributing beliefs is quite, problematic. There is, however, an alternative answer to this question that appeals to reliability without making perceptual justification dependent upon beliefs that attribute reliability to perceptual experiences. According to this second answer to the J question, perceptual experiences are a source of justification because we have justification for taking them to be reliable. That's the view we shall call the compromise position. Next time, we're going to be going over coherentism in more depth. For more on what we discussed today, there's a few sources for you. You can look at the Introduction to Contemporary Epistemology, which it was by Jonathan Dancy in 1985. You'll find that on the Blackwell Companion Guide, as well as The Truth and the Epistemic Goal, written by Marion David. Back in 2001, and also on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy page on foundationalism itself. I hope you all enjoyed this little lesson, and you have a nice day.
And hello everyone, welcome to Trolling with Logic, and joining me this week we do have our special guest. Some of you may know him from his appearances on the Atheist Experience show. He is currently the Professor of Social Psychiatry, part of the School of Social Sciences in the University of Bangor, and probably best known for his role in the whole religion in healthcare issue. So please everyone, welcome Rob Poole. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I hope sometimes with my guests, sometimes their web pages are out of date. So is all that information correct and up to date?
The stuff from the from our research centre website.
Yeah,
more or less.
All right,
a little bit out of date, but there's nothing there that I'm not doing anymore.
Okay, that's great. So I think we'll just get fired straight into the main topic that everyone will be wanting to hear about. So what is the kind of current role of religion within the health service here in the UK?
Well, I think we continue to be in a state of change and controversy. The things appeared to me to start to shift significantly about 10 years ago. Historically, we've had a publicly funded NHS chaplaincy for a long time, which is multi-faith. And I personally have no objection to that. I think it's perfectly appropriate that people who have a religious faith should be able to get help with that when they're stuck in hospital. That seems perfectly okay to me. Some people will object, I don't. But the question of making religion or spirituality part of actual medical treatment is relatively new in this country. Now, there's been controversy about it in the US for a long time. There's a guy called Richard Sloan, who's a psychiatrist who's based at, I think, Cornell, certainly one of the New York universities, who published a book about religion and medicine in the US. Obviously, the US is a much more religious society. He was publishing as long ago. He had an article in The Lancet as long ago as 1999 about the combination. But it's not really been evident in this country until much more recently. To some extent, that's been because of American-funded activities. You'll remember some controversies, for example, around Nadine Dorries and the attempts to lower the time limit for terminating pregnancies, which turned out to be driven by something called the Christian Legal Center, which appears to be an American-funded, born-again Christian organization. So we began to see this kind of activity over the last 10 years. And then it's gradually built to the point where there have been quite open and I would say sometimes a little aggressive efforts to say that issues of religion and spirituality aren't just something that should be considered as part of someone's background, but actually something that should be actively considered as part of treatment in the UK. And that's at the point at which I started making a fuss.
Okay, because straight to mind, I've had kind of sort of a personal experience with this. I used to live in Oxfordshire, and one of my flatmates, he went to hospital, but his father was a Jehovah's Witness. And I remember his father was, even though they didn't speak, the father he kept trying to interfere with the hospital procedure, saying, don't give my son a blood transfusion, even though it went against their will. Is that the kind of things you're campaigning?
That's been a long-term thing. I mean, people, I mean, I think there are difficulties about people having religious prohibitions of various types. I mean, one of the things that's cropped up in my practice, I'm a psychiatrist. I've always been a practicing clinical psychiatrist. Much of my working life has been in multi-ethnic areas. And one would sometimes find that people who were mentally unwell didn't want to take the medication because they said that there was alcohol in the medication in the course of preparation, and it conflicted with, for example, the Muslim prohibition on taking medications. That kind of thing is long-standing, and that's just life. I mean, you have to find ways of accommodating to people's beliefs, their culture, their background when they're patients. I don't find that difficult. What I find difficult is when you bring the professionals' religious belief or their political belief or any other idiosyncratic belief that's unrelated to the person, to healthcare, into the interview with the patient and into the part as part of their actual treatment. So as and this is focused on what's been happening in psychiatry because I'm a psychiatrist. So the start of it was an article that was published in a journal called the Psychiatric Bulletin, which is a journal that's published by the Royal College of Psychiatrists and by a guy called Harold Koenig, who's pretty much the world top religion and mental health academic. And this advocated a number of things, some of which were uncontroversial, such as consulting with clergy or other religious leaders when you're trying to understand a religious or problem. That's fine. I've done that myself. But also advocated sometimes praying with patients, albeit with caution. This is for the doctor, the psychiatrist, to pray with patients. Challenging unhealthy religious beliefs. I don't know how you decide what an unhealthy religious belief was, and that everyone should have a spiritual history taken from them, including atheists, even if they resist it. This seemed to me to be very intrusive, but they have nothing to do with our central expertise. This seems to be breaking a boundary. The reason I felt the need to respond, because I'd seen this stuff expressed before, was that because it was a journal of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, it carried a commentary by the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists at the time, Baroness Hollins, as she now is, Sheila Hollins, a professor of learning disability psychiatry, which endorsed this point of view. So it made it look like it was kind of Royal College of Psychiatrists policy. It wasn't, but at that point I felt one had to start raising one's voice and say, no, this isn't appropriate. This breaks a professional boundary. Now, there's been quite a lot of people have been concerned about this, and I've just ended up, because I suppose I talk too much or something, as the main person resisting this. Perhaps other people are more wise in letting me get on with it. But anyway, but we now see a proliferation of conferences, often NHS-sponsored conferences, about spirituality and healthcare, and there's a growing movement about fusing these two. I find this worrying. In part, I find it worrying because I belong to, I'm one member of a large minority. I'm an atheist. I was brought up an atheist. I'm a third-generation atheist. And one of the things I always find quite difficult as an atheist is that people with a faith don't seem to find the need to respect atheists' point of view in the same way as they expect religious beliefs to be respected. But that's only one part of it. That really wouldn't be a reason for writing to all the journals. The reason for my level of activity about this has been that I think that this isn't compatible with a diverse, multicultural society. I think it is reversing the usual arrangement where the patient comes first. This puts the professionals' religious needs and spiritual needs first, although it gets dressed up in a different way.
Yeah, so like kind of one of the most obvious things that we hear about quite often is, say, doctors refusing to give out birth control when it's needed. So that kind of thing that you're...
Well, that kind of thing is of concern, although I think if one speaks to people in America, like Tracy Harris, in fact, there are big problems in America where it can be impossible to get postcoital contraception, for example. In this country, it's very clear. If one personally feels unable to deal with a problem because of a religious objection, then you're pretty much obliged to put the patient in contact with someone who doesn't feel that. Now, I can see that. I think it's difficult, and there are issues about that, but at least the patient at the end of the day gets the treatment. I'm much more concerned with a kind of fudging of the limits of what belongs to medicine and what belongs to religion. Okay. So medicine isn't perfect. It exists in a scientific framework. I don't think science is a belief system. I think that, in fact, it's very far from being a belief system. Science is a way of trying to understand the world that involves uncertainty. It doesn't involve fixed beliefs. It involves the knowledge that every belief that you have is subject to revision. And we're entrusted with people's health because we use applied science. That's the assumption that the entire population makes, and what gives doctors their status. Plus, we practice through transparent values, which they weren't transparent in the past. They were kind of implicit in the past. But these days, if you want to find out what values I'm meant to practice by, you can go and look at the GMC's guidance, and it will tell you what values I'm meant to adhere to in offering you treatment. The problem with bringing my, I don't have a religion, but if I did have a religion, bringing my religion into the consulting room is it introduces a completely random factor, a factor that may serve your needs or may not. Your religious needs can be served elsewhere, but your medical needs can't be, and so it just isn't appropriate to fuse the medical and the religious, even if it's well intended, as I think it probably is most of the time. It just isn't appropriate. It is not. It's a boundary breach in terms of the professional limits of the expertise of the doctor.
Yeah. So, just what's some of the practical examples you've seen of this in your own field, or that you've heard of?
Well, okay. Well, quite a lot, really. Well, I have know of an example of someone who had taken an overdose of paracetamol, presenting in an accident emergency department, where the doctor that assessed them was wearing a fish Christian badge, and told this individual that paracetamol was extremely poisonous, but luckily God had given us an antidote in the form of methionine, which is what you give people to help them overcome paracetamol overdoses. Now, it was quite a small thing, but obviously this individual was at a very sensitive point in their life. They were in something of a crisis, as it happened, and without outside of the doctor's knowledge, this individual was an atheist and didn't really want to talk to the doctor thereafter, because it just seemed likely that they were going to get a whole load of religious stuff, and this person wasn't in a place in their life to do that. So therefore, the doctor's assessment could only be impaired because they brought something of their own beliefs into the room that had then made it more difficult for the patient to open up about their situation.
Yeah.
That's one example. I could probably drag up some others if a lot of time to think about it.
All right. I'm just going to go to one question that kind of sort of melds into that. It's from Spencer in the Scottish Secular Society. He's asking, is it ethical for psychiatrists to challenge the patient's religious beliefs if it is detrimental to the causation of their illness? Sorry, did you catch all of that?
No, I think so. I was just it's the two elements. Well, firstly, I don't think in general it's ethical for psychiatrists to challenge people's religious beliefs. I have given talks to humanist groups, and sometimes the humanists will say, well, surely it's your ethical duty as a doctor to challenge people's superstitions. And my view is, no, it's not. My view is to do just the thing that helps the person with the problem they brought to me. So I don't think it's ethical to challenge people's religious beliefs. I would never dream of doing that. In fact, I'm very reluctant to tell people I'm an atheist, although if they ask, I feel I have to be truthful about that, and so I tell them. But I wouldn't offer that fact about myself. I think there are circumstances where it can be difficult, because just like any other strong set of beliefs or important part of one's life, when people are mentally ill, it can all get a bit mixed up. So people, when they're psychotic, for example, can believe they're experiencing the voice of God telling them to do things, sometimes things that are very dangerous for them, and a range of other experiences that are potentially hazardous to them. Under those circumstances, one is bound to take a view about what is driven by illness and what is driven by sincerely held belief. And that's one area where psychiatrists certainly have to have a view about religion and have got quite a good knowledge about religion in recognising the limits of what is likely to be shared by other people with similar beliefs, or what is likely to be idiosyncratic or related to illness factors in the person. But in terms of actually trying to change people's long-term religious beliefs in themselves, that is definitely unethical.
Yeah. Okay, just give me a second. There was another question, but I've lost it there. I was going to... The one thing I did think about there was the whole... Like I say, the religion and mental illness, they've kind of got a bit of a troubled relationship, don't they?
They have, yes.
Yeah, it's to put it lightly. I don't know. I'm trying to formulate the question here. But like I said, is that improving, do you think? Like, because I don't know, like on the side, like in psychiatry, especially like religious psychiatrists, have you come across ones where, I don't know, like I say, it's interfering with their judgment process of diagnosing people with mental issues?
I have come across isolated examples like that. I have to say straight away, I have worked with many people with strong religious beliefs where it has had no detrimental effect on their clinical practice whatsoever. When I worked in Liverpool, I worked alongside two other consultants, actually sharing the same patch and in the same offices, who had strong born again beliefs. They're friends of mine. They're good psychiatrists. I don't believe that just being religious interferes. However, I have seen circumstances where I have felt that the person's religious beliefs has clouded their judgment, and they've understood something that I have thought to be definitely illness-based, to be a spiritual problem, and therefore not amenable to treatment in the normal way.
And just to go back to something you said earlier, there's these spirituality and healthcare conferences. What exactly, I mean, I don't know if you've been to any, or what exactly goes on in them, and what is it they're trying to push?
Well, there are various people around the UK who go and give talks about this kind of stuff. And there's quite a variety of ideas around, quite a range, and so to some individuals, there's a retired psychiatrist, someone who I've known for many years, called Larry Calliford, who's based down in Brighton, who has developed an idea called psychospirituality, which he claims to be a paradigm shift, a kind of fusion of Christian, Eastern religious ideas with elements of psychological ideas, and is often invited to give talks at these kind of conferences, basically propagating this kind of model as a way of working with people. I have, in fact, I'm doing research developing research with a colleague, Chris Cook, who's a professor of psychiatry and an ordained Anglican priest based in Durham, who strongly advocates the importance of taking into account religion and being prepared to work at a religious or spiritual level with people. Now, he's very cautious about what he says, Chris, and he's very clear that you shouldn't proselytize. We are in dispute because I don't see what he's advocating as being benign. So we had a very recent, this month, in fact, we had an exchange of letters in the British Journal of Psychiatry, because Chris had written a commentary about a paper from America that showed that it was a good quality paper, methodologically sound, strongly suggested that people with who were religiously observant, in other words, church attenders, had a lower rate of suicide than the rest of the population. And Chris wrote a commentary saying that this had implications for clinical practice. And I wrote a letter saying, well, no, it doesn't have implications for clinical practice. There are many groups in the population who have higher or lower rates of suicide, occupational groups, geographical groups, all kinds of factors affect the risk of suicide. What would the clinical implication, in other words, how would it make a difference to how you treated or advised patients to know that churchgoers in America are less likely to commit suicide? Would you promote religion? Amongst the religious, would you suggest they attended more frequently? I don't think so. I think that would be a boundary breach. I don't see that the research would lead to that conclusion. Well, he differs with me, and he wrote a letter supporting that position. Now, that sounds relatively subtle, but in fact, what we know about boundaries is that you have to have clarity about them. So we have many scandals in the UK at the moment about people being exploited as children or as adults in positions of vulnerability, sexually exploited by other people. And there have been, at times, waves of scandals around medical practitioners. And consequently, we have very, very clear ideas about where the boundaries lie, about the relationships between doctors and patients, the type of touch that might be appropriate, and there needs to be absolute clarity about that. If there isn't clarity, then you just slip in. Some people will slip into abusive relationships without knowing that they've crossed a boundary. Sometimes boundaries do have to be breached. For example, I don't think it's right that you should hug your patients. that doesn't seem to me to be the right relationship between a doctor and patient. Sometimes people are very grateful to you at the end of treatment, and they do want to give you a hug, and then you have to allow that to happen. But you have to justify why you've allowed that boundary breach to occur. This fudging of boundaries about religion seems to me to be the royal road, opening up to proselytization, to an abuse of power for religious purposes.
So it's pretty much like a wedge strategy they've got going.
Well, the question is it intentional or not? I'm not sure that it's intentional. I thought some of these people are well-meaning, but being well-meaning doesn't mean you're right or that it's right. Certainly, there are some people, I think, there are some groups around who are looking for the opportunity to use a wedge strategy, as I say. But I think it would be wrong to suggest that the entire group of people who are interested in bringing religion into practice are motivated in that way. I think many of them believe that this is a counter to a kind of dehumanized form of practice that they perceive has developed. And in that, and there is a degree of truth in the fact that we've got a very programmatic form of care in psychiatry and in other areas of medicine in the NHS today, which has been driven mainly by the types of financial models that are developed in the NHS. I don't think the solution to that is religion. I think the solution to that is that we should continue to try and build medicine on relationships between specific doctors of specific patients, and that we should take into account people's psychological and social circumstances as well as biological factors when we're trying to improve their health. That doesn't mean we have to have recourse to understanding everything in spiritual or religious terms.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is something that's come up because I've had some dealings with some alt-med people. But do you also think it's also on the patient side, maybe, the religion just seems a bit warmer, more welcoming, and maybe, the secular approach just seems a bit cold to them?
Well, I don't see why.
Yeah.
It is certainly the case that some people do want to see someone of their own religion. And so I have had people ask me, do you have, what's your religion? I say, I'm an atheist. And they say, well, you won't understand. I want to talk to someone who shares my religion. And insofar as it's possible, I would tend to conform to that because it's coming from the patient. Yeah. There are occasions when people want to become engaged in spiritual activities that are definitely inappropriate, either because they're ill and have got a kind of an illness-driven misunderstanding about what's going on in their life. So people, for example, who become psychotic and believe themselves to be satanically possessed or demonically possessed want exorcisms rather than medical treatment and that kind of stuff, at which point you do have to kind of say, no, I don't think that's the appropriate thing to do. There is a judgment call about what you do when people come to you, asking you to get involved with their religion. I certainly wouldn't. I think you've got to accommodate to people's wishes as far as you can, insofar as it's compatible with doing your job properly. Yeah. Where I differ with the spirituality group is the degree to which to do religion yourself is compatible with doing your job properly.
Okay, so yeah, you're kind of, I don't know, you don't mind if, like you said, the patient says, oh, I'm a Catholic, and then, if it's just a conversation, oh, I'm a Catholic too, and we go to start, if it's a rapport building, you're fine with that, yeah.
Well, I think you've got to be careful.
Okay.
I think you've got to be careful because I think, firstly, those kind of things have got two sides to them. I'm a Catholic, yeah, I'm a Catholic too, can mean, oh, you may know people I know. And then, oh, is this fully confidential? And that kind of stuff. Secondly, I think that there's a real danger in thinking that because you share any characteristic with the person, you have a special bond with them. It's an invitation to misunderstand what's going on, because what it drives you to do is understand things in terms of your experience rather than theirs. So, and it's clear, for example, just to take Catholicism, people have very different experiences of their own Catholicism. For some people, it's very persecutory. For some people, it's extremely comforting. And to think you both have, just because you're both Catholics, the place that the Catholic Church has in your life is the same. That's wrong. So you've got to be careful with that thing. Yeah, building rapport and having some warmth is important, but therein lies the greatest risk in a doctor's relationship with the patient, because that's where the slips can occur most easily that lead you into some other type of relationship, which, although it may be well-meaning, can end up being abusive.
Okay. Just another thing, do you find like there's a lot of the Eastern New Age stuff involved in this as well? Because I'm getting that impression very much. And the reason I say that is, my mother, a few years ago, she had breast cancer. And I've been to, I went along to support groups with her. And I did find a lot of the kind of New Age stuff creeping in a lot into the aftercare support she was being offered.
Yes, I think that's correct. I think Eastern religious ideas kind of half-baked, not actually the religion as it's actually practiced, but bits and pieces, has entered into our national consciousness. So I think there's many, many people who will say, oh, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, and it turns out they believe a range of things. They might say, oh, I believe in karma, for example, but there's not the rest of Hinduism in what they believe. So we do have this rather unusual situation where people kind of mix and match the beliefs that they have. And we now have mindfulness as a treatment modality, which is widely available in the NHS. And mindfulness does use meditation techniques and bits and pieces that come from Eastern religion. We also, and what do I think about that? Well, as far as I can see, mindfulness does seem to be a useful technique. The fact that it borrows techniques from religion doesn't necessarily bother me. I have a greater difficulty with Alcoholics Anonymous and the Minnesota method. I don't know if you know much about that, but just to explain, it's the Alcoholics Anonymous has got two elements really. One element is the fellowship, just people going along, sharing the fact that they're alcoholics and trying to support each other. And then there's the 12-step program, and that depends upon people recognizing themselves to be powerless to control their problem and placing their faith in a higher power. So clearly, it's got a religious basis. There is controversy over the evidence that the Alcoholics Anonymous program works particularly well. The reason for that is it has very high dropout rates in some cases because of the religious component. And yet, it's kind of you have to buy many of the things that they say as items of faith. Now, I do recommend people going to Alcoholics Anonymous when I think it's going to help them, because Alcoholics Anonymous is tremendously supportive. You don't have to go into the 12-step program, and the 12-step program does work for some people. I've seen people do extremely well with that program. I do feel the need to have to say to people, there is this very specific set of ideas that some people really find helpful and some people find off-putting. You're just going to have to try it and see. So it's that thing. It's that thing where, well, if we're going to have these admixtures of religion, people have got to have a choice and got to go into it knowingly. I find some difficulty when you're not offered any choice, when you just go in and that's what you get.
Okay. Sorry there, I got distracted by something. So, like I say, what's the pushback been from the other side? Has there been quite a vocal or aggressive pushback?
Well, the pushback has basically been me. The
pushback to yourself raising this. Have you had much of a pushback on it?
Sorry, what do you mean? Do you mean persecution?
No, just have you had any kind of response? Like, well, you've said, you've objected to the spirituality in healthcare, and the other side's come back at you.
Yeah. What's actually happened? So the story of this is that to look back, I've talked a lot, and I suppose you're interviewing me, so I'm allowed to talk a lot. If we go back to the original situation where this guy, Harold Koenig, published this article, it was an editorial, in fact, in the Psychiatric Bulletin, I thought, okay, this is beyond the pale. And I went round to a group of colleagues and asked them what they thought. And this was a group of colleagues, some of whom had a religious faith, some of whom didn't. Some of whom were there was a practicing Catholic, for example. And we all agreed, and we wrote a letter, which I was the first author of, and I sent this letter off, and that sparked everything off from there. And so the larger group of us did some stuff with my colleague Robert Higo. We've written some articles in the scientific journals. I've spoken a lot. I found myself in a debate with George Carey in October 2010. That was an unusual experience. I never expected to find myself debating with a former Archbishop of Canterbury, but there you go. That was organised by the Royal College of Psychiatrists Spirituality Special Interest Group. So it was nice that they invited me. And I've had enormous amounts of support insofar as lots of people have written emails to me, lots of people have written letters to me, encouraging me to take the position I've taken, and other people have been writing letters to the journals and making points other than the points that I've been making. So there's been a lot of controversy has been generated. It isn't just me; it's a number of people, a large number of people, in fact. It's been interesting what's happened in the opposite direction. More lately, the other side, so to speak, have taken to saying that I've done them a favour by bringing the matter to light and creating some controversy and interest in it. Well, that may be the case, but there you go. I've been troubled, or very troubled, by a tendency from some people on the other side of the debate to try and construe me as saying something I'm not saying. So there's been a recurrent thing of trying to construe me as pursuing a Richard Dawkins kind of campaign to say no religion, it's just a dangerous superstition, don't take it, mustn't be discussed. I've never said that. I mean, you hear that isn't what I'm advocating. I'm advocating adherence to proper professional boundaries, and that's been kind of really annoying to have words put in my mouth, and I've had right up to very recently, suggestions that I'm saying something that unreasonable that I'm not saying. I think this is because they find it very difficult to disagree with my logic. So one of the things that they tend to say is, I agree with you about almost everything. Well, and I say, no, we've got a great big disagreement. So there's this kind of combination of trying to construe what I'm saying as being something different to what I'm actually arguing, and also the argument that we don't actually differ. Well, we do differ. In fact, we differ in a very major way. And the attempt to construe it seems to me to be a very typically British attempt to assimilate critics. We just assimilate us all, and then we're all friends, really, kind of thing. Well, we are all friends at one level, but the fact is there is a major disagreement going on here, and that's something I reiterated in the most recent letter that I talked about in the British Journal of Psychiatry.
Yeah, it's just the chairman of the Scottish Secular Society, he's had a similar kind of pushback when it was involved with the healthcare in Scotland, and it was, the millions they were spending on, I think to the Catholic Church.
Yes.
To provide, and he was just saying, can we do, you can still have it, but let's not be diverting NHS funds. And straight away the immediate pushback, so you just don't want priests in hospitals. And he would say, no, that's not what I've said. He said, you can still have it, but we just don't want all the taxpayer money going towards it, because, there's taxpayers paying for health service from every kind of religious and non-religious background.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, it's a very British way of either of trying to construe your opponent as completely unreasonable, or as being the same as you. This doesn't seem to happen in national debates in other countries, as far as I can see. Yeah,
and like I say, the other kind of pushback I find in going against these kind of established religious ideas in the UK is the other one is, just leave it alone. It doesn't bother anyone. Just let it be. It's nice, and just let it. It's just what people do.
The other one that I have had quite frequently is kind of people being a bit affronted. Because I certainly, when I started, I did feel that there was a kind of an organised attempt to kind of draw into a religious context a lot of areas of public life in this country. Right, this is certainly one of the things George Carey advocates. He advocates that we should have a distinctively Christian form of society because we're a Christian society. So he's kind of fighting back over what I have to say is the gradual kind of dwindling away of the power of the Anglican Church in the UK.
Yeah.
I don't think that. I think there is a group that are doing that. They definitely are trying to draw it in. I don't really think that there's a conspiracy as such, and they do get very upset, very affronted at the suggestion that that this is wrong. That actually this is wrong. Some people seem to get very caught up in their certainty that their faith is a good thing, and find it very difficult to see that there might be an aspect of it that really might be quite damaging for some people under some circumstances, without it being anything about abuse or scandalous behaviour, but just in itself that religion can undermine certain types of healthcare or relationship.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, in Britain, it is very ingrained to kind of look upon the established religion as being very benign all the time.
Yes.
And not kind of looking, or sometimes there might be, even with the best of intentions, there can sometimes be some pretty bad consequences.
Well, I think it was actually a clergyman, wasn't it? It was Desmond Tutu that spoke about the Europeans going to South Africa, and when they arrived, the settlers had books and the Africans had the land, and then they looked around and suddenly they had Bibles and the Europeans had the land. I think you've got to understand, and I think that there's a kind of a lack of insight sometimes in failing to recognise that people of other faiths and from different countries can perceive, especially the established religion, as having a kind of imperialistic quality to it, kind of the ideological shock troops of the British Empire kind of thing. Yeah. That hasn't gone away. That's something that's big for people.
Yeah, I was just going to say, are you finding some support from, say, like now we have a fairly sizable Muslim minority in this country. I mean, are they quite supportive towards your aims, or have they not said anything?
Well, I have support from all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. I can't say that it's particularly true of people from Muslim background, but I also have to say that there are plenty of people from Muslim background on the other side of the debate. That would tend to be people of a kind of liberal Muslim persuasion who would see Christianity and Islam and Judaism all relating to the same God. That clearly isn't a view of all Jews, all Christians, and all Muslims. So there are people on both sides of the argument. I don't think it divides particularly along religious grounds.
Okay, so we're coming up towards the end. So I think what I'd like to ask is, if anyone comes into contact with this stuff in their medical treatment, what steps can they take, to either report it or have it dealt with?
I think simply to complain.
Yeah.
Simply to use the normal complaints process to complain. I think the difficulty is that we wanted to look at the incidents, the known incidents of abuse, of religious abuse, if you like, people proselytizing, for example, in the clinical setting. And of course, no one has any figures because no one makes the complaint.
Yeah.
And I think the complaint system, at least in the NHS, it's not got a good reputation, but nonetheless, if people don't use it, nothing will change. And if we don't know that people are being bothered by this stuff, then we're not going to see anything done about it. At the moment, it feels to me as if I'm winning the debate, but losing the war. It seems to me that the spread of this stuff about getting religion into clinical practice is continuing or accelerating. Everyone seems to agree that in the stuff that's been published, I get the better of the actual arguments, but it doesn't seem to make much difference. And I think we need evidence from people on the ground using services. If people are bothered by religious material being presented to them in the clinical setting, they should use the complaint system. Then we'll begin to see that there is actually a problem. At the moment, people think it's just a rhetorical issue as far as many people are concerned.
Yeah, and also I suppose people can, as well as complaining, just ask to see another professional for their treatment.
They can, yes.
That is their right. A lot of people seem to... I always find that people just seem to think whoever's treating you is the best at it, and you can't ask for another opinion or go to someone else.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, basically, no medical treatment can work unless you trust the person treating you. We all go, me too. When I'm a patient, I want to trust the person that's in front of me. And patients tend to be very forgiving of doctors and nurses' idiosyncrasies. But the fact is that you have got a right to see somebody else if someone's use of their religious beliefs is bothering you. And people should actually exercise their rights.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can draw to a close there. Thank you very, very much for coming along, Rob. It's been really interesting. Thanks very much.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Yep. And is there any last message? We usually give our guests like a quick 30-minute if you want to promote any work or if people want to contact you with anything. Here's your chance.
People can find my contact details on the website of the Centre for Mental Health and Society, which can be found simply by putting CFMHAS into Google, and the details of that will come up, and you can get into my profile. That will show you much of what we've done. Christmas is coming up. We had a book published this year. It's called Mental Health and Poverty, published by Cambridge University Press. It's got nothing about religion in it whatsoever, but it's a jolly good read. Poole, Higo and Robinson.
Okay. All right, that's great. And thank you very much, everyone. And I don't know what the next section is in the show. It's not coming up yet, but we'll be back in a second. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Bye now.
Bye.
Hi there, Kitchs here, and welcome to my segment where I will be discussing what are biofilms. Well, what are biofilms? If you ask this question at a biofilm conference, prepare for war. For simplicity, in this segment, biofilms are communities of bacteria attached to a solid surface. In nature, they are made up of more than one species, and are the way bacteria prefer to grow in real-world environments. They usually do this in response to some sort of stress, such as shortage of nutrients. The first step is anchorage, where the bacteria use molecular anchors called pili and flagella to stick themselves to a solid surface. They then produce a sticky substance called the extracellular polymeric substance, or EPS, which is made from primarily sugars called the extracellular polysaccharide, but also contains proteins and DNA called eDNA. The biofilm grows over a number of days, and finally cells are released into the environment to start the process all over again, on an uncolonized surface. This is how the biofilm spreads. Many bacteria can form a biofilm, and their growth as a biofilm can cause problems. For example, the plaque on your teeth is a biofilm, containing but not limited to the bacterium Streptococcus mutagens. Metal oxidizing bacteria corrode metal pipes in a process known as biofouling. Biofouling can affect public drinking water. One method to prevent this is water chlorination. Cystic fibrosis patients are much more likely to develop a Pseudomonas aeruginosa infection, as the excess mucosa allows for easier growth and development of the aeruginosa biofilm. The matrix of the biofilm also lowers the effectiveness of antibiotics due to the diffusion of the antibiotics into the biofilm, lowers their concentration as they diffuse into the matrix. Also, medical devices that are inserted into a patient's body usually include an antimicrobial coating, as they are prime targets for biofilm formation, such as urinary catheters, pacemakers, etc. Biofilms are usually bad, but in recent years we're discovering new uses for these microbial communities. For example, we use biofilms in wastewater to remove organic and inorganic contaminants in the water. There are, as I'm sure you know, bacteria in your gut that help protect you from foreign pathogens and to digest your food. This bacterial community is known as your microbiome, which is also a biofilm. Disruptions in the makeup of your biofilm have also been linked to medical illnesses such as Crohn's disease, but only disruptions on a broad or genus level. Electroactive bacteria, when grown on a nanode in a microbial fuel cell, can break down organic molecules to generate an electrical current. One study by Newton et al. In 2009 found that microbial fuel cells containing a Shirnella lohica PV4 biofilm showed as much as a 7 times increase in current production when compared to when the bacteria was present as suspended cells. Studies since then have shown that bacteria produce electron shuttles called flavins, which transport metabolically generated electrons to electron acceptors outside the cell, such as an anode or a metal ion. This is all for this segment. This is only supposed to serve as a brief overview of biofilms, so hopefully you might go away and study up on them if I piqued your interest. If you enjoyed this segment or other segments on today's show, please feel free. We have a Patreon page, so the link should be somewhere on the webpage. Please feel free, if you're willing and able, to donate anything. There are rewards there for donating. And stay tuned for the next segment, which I'm not even going to hazard a guess at. So, goodbye and see you next week, folks.
And thank you all for listening to this week's edition of Trolling with Logic. Again, very sorry for the shortened format. We didn't have enough people around to do the news. Everyone's quite busy this week. But again, if you have enjoyed the show, please consider supporting us on our Patreon. The money really will help us improve the quality of the show. And apart from that, we hope you really enjoyed this show, and we'll be back again very soon with a full lineup. Thanks for listening, and see you all again soon. Bye.
they abandon their belief in the supernatural. Now, you are asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No!
Hello everyone and welcome to Trolling with Logic for this week. Sadly, we don't have a news segment for you. We were unable to get everyone together. There was just too much going on with people's personal lives. But we do have some segments, and we do have an interview we recorded a few months ago with Rob Poole about spirituality and healthcare. We have Lundy continuing his guide to philosophy, and Kitchs has a segment for us. Sadly, Ziller's not available this week. He has some personal stuff to take care of, so the guide to geometry will be back at some point in the future. In the meantime, sit back, enjoy, and next up is Lundy with his philosophy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one more Philosophy 101. I'm Big Lundy and I'm your guide for today. Last time we discussed the base can all be basic as well. Suppose instead of B you believe that the hat is blue, but unlike the original belief, this one is about the hat itself and not the way the hat appears to you, such as a belief that not one about which we are infallible or otherwise epistemically privileged. Privileged foundationalism would therefore classify this belief as non-basic. It is, however, quite plausible to think that this experience justifies not only the belief, but also this new belief, as it's about the hat itself and not just how it appears to you. If this experience is indeed what justifies this new belief, and this new belief does not receive any additional justification from any further beliefs of yours, then this new belief qualifies, according to DB, as basic. Experiential foundationalism then combines two crucial ideas. One, when a justified belief is basic, its justification is not owed by any other belief. And two, what in fact justifies basic beliefs are themselves experiences. Under ordinary circumstances, perceptual beliefs such as this belief about the hat itself are not based on any further beliefs about one's own personal experiences. It's unclear, therefore, how privileged foundationalism can account for the justification of ordinary perpetual beliefs like the hat is blue, and this is a statement about the hat itself rather than your experience of the hat. Excessive epistemic reasoning. We went over foundationalism, coherentism, and foundherentism, and we learned the short answer to the question of, does every justification itself require justification, is no. Today we'll get into a bit more detail on one of these three approaches to epistemic reasoning processes. For a foundationalist account of justification to be plausible, it has to solve two problems. First, by virtue of what exactly is a basic belief justified? Second, how do basic beliefs justify non-basic beliefs? Before we address these questions, let us first consider the question as to what makes a justified belief basic in the first place. Once we've done that, we can then move on to discuss by virtue of what basic belief might be justified and how such a belief might justify a non-basic belief. According to one approach, what makes a justified belief basic is that it doesn't receive its justification from any other beliefs. Let's go over doxastic basicality, or DB for short. A person's justified belief that P is basic, if and only if that person's belief that P is justified without owing its justification to any of that person's other beliefs. Let's consider what would, according to DB, qualify as an example of a basic belief. Suppose you notice someone's hat, and you also notice that hat looks blue to you. So you believe it appears that the hat is blue, and unless something very strange is going on, this belief is an example of a justified belief. DB tells us that this belief is basic if and only if it does not owe its justification to any other beliefs of your experience of yours. According to the thought we're considering here, a subject's basic beliefs are made up of introspective beliefs about the subject's own mental states, of which perpetual experiences make up one subset. Other mental states, which are subject to have basic beliefs, include such things as having a headache, being tired, feeling pleasure, or having a desire for a cup of coffee. Beliefs about external objects do not and indeed cannot qualify as basic. It's impossible for such beliefs to be on their own a kind of epistemic privilege needed for the status of being basic. According to a different version of foundationalism, a belief is justified not by virtue of possessing some kind of privileged status, but some further mental state of yours. That mental state, however, is not a further belief of yours. Rather, it's a perceptual experience that the belief is about. The hat's looking blue to you. Let's use the variable E to represent that experience. According to this alternative proposal, the belief and E are distinct mental states. The idea is that what justifies B and E, since E is an experience, not a belief of yours, and B is, according to DB. It's basic. Let's call the two versions of foundationalism that we just went over distinguished privilege foundationalism and experiential foundationalism. Privileged foundationalism restricts basic beliefs to beliefs about one's own mental states. Experiential foundationalism is less restrictive. According to it, beliefs about external objects are worse. So if this belief is indeed basic, there might be some item to other or which that this belief owes its justification, but that item would not be another belief of yours. We call this kind of basicality doxastic because it makes basicality a function of how your doxastic system, your belief system, is structured. Now let us turn to the question as to where the justification that attaches to a belief might come from. If we think of basicality as defined by doxastic basicality, note that doxastic basicality merely tells us how a belief is not justified. It says nothing as to how a belief is justified. DB, therefore, does not answer that question. What we need, in addition to DB, is an account of what it is that justifies a belief, such as the hat is blue. According to one strand of foundationalist thought, the belief is justified because it can't be false, doubted, or corrected by others. So a belief is justified because the belief carries with it an epistemic privilege, such as infallibility, indubitability, or incorrigibility. The idea is that this belief is justified by virtue of its intrinsic nature, which makes it possess some kind of epistemic privilege over all your others. Note that the belief is not a belief about the hat. Rather, it's a belief about how the hat appears to you. So the belief is an introspective belief about a perception